Today we're going to talk about high availability, and we're primarily focusing on jobs. So first, I'm just going to give a high-level overview of what a Rundeck cluster is, talk about job execution and the policies that we can set for where jobs get executed, heartbeat, how each cluster member knows about each other, a new feature that we have as of, I think, 3.1 or 3.2, which is recovery retry. So you can actually restart jobs that have been executed, and a node goes down and it will resume the job on a different cluster member, and how to auto take over jobs which have been scheduled. So Rendeck cluster, and I'm going to provide links for more details on a lot of the things I'm covering at a high level that are specifically enterprise, right? So a Rendeck cluster is when you have one or more instances of Rendeck. They're still connected to the same authentication, and on the back end, they're both connected. And you can have two or more instances in a cluster, right? The same database. And they're going to share the logs from your executions between all of the cluster members, right? In order for users to actually see the previous activity and watch their job executing through the log output. And that's pretty much all I'm going to say about the cluster environment, other than focusing now on the two instances and how we achieve high availability with jobs. So the first option, and we covered this about a year ago in depth, some of these features that I'm going to talk about. So I'm just going to cover these on a high level. When a user logs into Rendeck and they click the Run Now button, right, they're running a job, you can determine using these remote execution policies or options where the job actually runs from. So out of the box, the way the Rundeck Enterprise is configured is wherever the user logs in is where the job will execute from. So that's going to be the Rundeck server that will actually run the job. There's a couple of reasons why you might want to do it that way, because when you're sharing your logs, there will be a slight delay if the job has run on a remote server. But there are a lot of reasons why you might decide that you want to run jobs on a different server than where you're having the users log in. So the options that you have is, here I've outlined them. So none is basically jobs will execute from wherever the user logs in and presses that Run Now button. Random, it's going to be randomly assigned. So you could have two or more cluster members. So it's just going to pick another cluster member, or maybe run from the same one. Round robin is the same way, kind of like your load balancer. It's kind of doing some balancing of the jobs, right, by alternating where jobs are executing from. You can also, in some environments, you may decide that you want to choose by the workload of the Rendeck servers. So you might want to base it on, like, especially people who have jobs that are executing local on the server and using a lot of memory and stuff, log running jobs, etc. You may decide to create a load balancing policy, right, that is going to base where the job executes on how busy each instance is. And then preset means you can choose just one other server, other than the one you're on, to run that job. Actually, it could also be the one you're on. And typically preset is going to be used when you decide to create a policy at the project level. So right here, what I'm showing is how you set up the execution policies, right, on kind of at the framework level, at the server level. But you can also get very specific and create policies for projects themselves that allow you to isolate which Rendeck server might run that job. We can talk about that more at the end, but this is typically going to be in environments that have some kind of regulatory or compliance. Maybe you have a dependency like an Ansible project, right? And you've only set up your Ansible server on one or two Rendeck instances. You may want to be very specific at project level of where you're going to have those Ansible jobs run. So, and I'll show this. I'm going to try to fit in a quick demo in half an hour. So I'll show you how you can tell where it's running from and what it looks like when it runs from someplace else, the job. So the heartbeat settings in Enterprise, we have a cluster manager. and we'll go through this in the demo. And the heartbeat is how other members are going to see if other instances are either alive or dead. So it's kind of important. Some of these settings, you can hurt yourself if you don't set them right. So the inactive, you'll notice over here, there's the green icon. And when we do the demo, you'll see that after 60 seconds, so my heartbeat interval is 30. So obviously my inactive will be at least double, right, my interval or longer. And I've shortened some of these for the purposes of the demo, but it will be considered inactive. Typically at this point, the rest of your policies for your takeovers and stuff are not going to be trying to take over, right? Once it's considered dead, and here again, I've shortened it, the default is 5 minutes. So as soon as it's marked dead, any of the next policies that we're talking about will either start trying to take over your schedules or take over executions, right, that have been marked as incomplete. And then this last setting right here, this is important because this is if a job is being executed, right? This is how long it's going to wait after it's marked dead in order to say that that job is incomplete. And again, all of these settings are documented. And when Tracy sends out the link to the video, she's going to send out links to the documentation. So this is a new feature as of 3.1. So this is when jobs are in play, someone either a scheduler has kicked off a job, right, or a user's kicked off a job. What happens when a Rendeck node goes down? So it's going to take that interval, right, and the log will get cleaned up. It will get marked as being incomplete, right, and then these are the settings that are going to take over. First, by default, this is disabled, so it's not going to take over any jobs that have failed. And here I've just used a policy of any, so you could also set it up to be specific on which nodes will pick up the jobs. So mine is any nodes that are alive. The delay in seconds before trying the auto retry, and you'll actually see it trying to take over a job. So once a node's been, a Rundeck instance been marked dead, you'll start seeing in the logs as a cluster member will be taking over that job for retry. So this is kind of the same as it's trying to get a hold of that job. How long is it going to delay? So schedule, right, you guys all know, like, and this is changing in the future, but right now schedule is part of the job definition. So when jobs are scheduled, if a Rundeck instance goes down, by default out of the box, the schedule time is just missed. So if you enable the takeover, what will happen is, and again, I've used any, but I could use static and specify which Rendeck node will take over jobs, for this node. But by choosing any nodes, Rendeck instances that are alive are going to go ahead and take over the schedule that would have been missed while that instance is down. And actually it will transfer all, future schedules to the other node members of the cluster. And again, this is just the waiting time, like how long after the node's marked dead before the schedules get transferred to another cluster member. So now I'm going to go into a demo. Okay, so this is my Rendeck instance. So I've set my Rendeck. I have 2 instances, and if you go over here, for those of you who are not familiar with Enterprise to Cluster Manager, so idle too long, you can see that I have my 2 instances, Rendeck 1 and Rendeck 2. Down at the bottom in Rundeck Enterprise with multiple instances, you can see which node that you're on in a given moment. It's also in the login screen. So you can see that I'm currently on Rendeck 1. The jobs tab over here shows you all of the jobs that are scheduled, right, across all of the projects in the system. So we can, wherever the user logs in and create this job and set the schedule is the cluster member that it gets assigned to. And you can see that everything right now is assigned to my Rendeck 1. This is where I'm logged into. So these select buttons, I could select individual jobs, right? I can select jobs by a project. Let's see, so here's the project name. I can also select everything that's on a Rendeck server. There we go. So I'm going to go ahead and take everything in the management project and the job execution takeover project. And change the schedule owner. So this does take a few minutes, right? But I can just transfer all of these to my other server pretty easily. And set them to Rendeck 2. And you can see up here that it's being updated. So I've spent a lot of time in the past couple of days breaking my Rundeck server in order to test some of these options. So I just want to show you what it looks like for taking over executions. So if I run a job that is not set for any retries and a Rundeck server goes down, it is not going to take over the execution of that job. It's only going to take over executions that are in progress by the instance that goes down if you've set up the retry. Go into this job with no schedule. And I'm going to talk about these settings. There we go. All right. So on the other tab, this is the exact setting that I'm talking about. If this was set to 0 so that it's not going to get retried if this job fails, then it also will not resume the execution on another node. So it has to have some retry here. And this setting by itself means that the job's going to be retried in its entirety. So it will restart the job from the very first step from the beginning. So we do have a new feature that allows you to make a job resumable and to resume on retry. And what this means is at the step where the failure occurred, or in this case where an instance is going offline, it's not really considered a failure, it's incomplete and then marked a failure. It will resume on the step that this happened on instead of starting the job again. So it depends, right, on your job and what your job is doing, whether or not you would want to use this feature. Okay. And likewise, right, we could only retry the failed nodes if we wanted. So I'm gonna just click out of here. And that's actually my load balancer setting, because I had my load balancer set so that it was waiting a long time before it switched me over. So made it a lot shorter, maybe too short. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and get some of these jobs started. Right, and we can see under activity, right, the jobs that are happening now. There are actually API calls that you can make, and I've included those in the links that would show you all of the jobs running across all of the projects at a given time. Let me go ahead and check what server I'm on right now. Right, Rendeck 1. And if I click into a job, I can actually see where it's running, right? And you know, this is the beginning of my UUID. So this one is actually running on my Rendeck 2, and here we're on the Rendeck 1. So I'm going to go ahead and kill my Rendeck 2. Okay, it's taking me a minute to kill my Rendeck 2.
Well, Pam, while that's running, we've got a few questions. One in particular, how are you simulating a cluster node failure here?
Oh, okay. So I'm actually doing a kill 9 on Rendeck, which is not recommended, by the way. So if you were to use this service, so if you were to use like your regular service restart or something, it will finish the jobs that are currently running before it does a shutdown, and I might have to restart this job. Nathan could actually field some of the questions.
So the other question that I see is, are all of these operations also exposed via the Rundeck CLI tools and implicit the API? The settings we're talking about are effectively done behind the scenes in the configuration. I don't know necessarily that there is a way to do any of this other than maybe changing who the owner of a job is. So Pam was showing us in the cluster manager, the ability to change who the job owner is. I believe that would be something that you could do through the CLI or the API, although I haven't actually been looking for it. But since most anything else you can do, you should be able to do that way. But the actual settings themselves, because they're behind the scenes, I don't know if there's a way to make that adjustment in terms of that configuration setting. I'll look into that, but I don't know how that would be done.
Yeah, no, you can't change a setting via the API because it's hard coded.
Pam, the next one you might have an answer for, or are you at the point where you want to step back to what you're doing here?
Yeah, I'm ready to kill it now.
All right, while you're doing that, can we resume the job on another server from the step where it failed after the first server goes down? I believe Pam will address that a little bit. So
Yeah, I think I showed the setting, right? So the resume on retry setting combined with the retry on the other tab. I can re-show that setting.
yeah, so just to be clear again, for the function to work where a job is going to be picked up by another server midstream, which is a new feature, you need to make sure that the job has the retry function turned on. So if you haven't set that ahead of time, then that function is not going to work. But if you had, then you would have that possibility.
So I've killed my other server. And if we go down to activity, right, we can see the job that's in progress. It might have actually switched over. No, so it says it's still thinking it's in progress on that other server, on the other cluster member, right? Because remember, we have all of our timeout settings, so it's not instantaneous. And now you can see here it's starting to think, oh, right, when it turns yellow in the bar, it's taking longer than average. So it's starting, right, there's some mechanics going on behind the scenes, right? It now knows, oh, this server is inactive. And you can see that it's indicating that with this after we reached a 2-minute mark. Because of the type of license I have, my Rendeck server is actually going to disappear, but yours should stay there because your license keys are going to be tied to a UUID. And I have a special key. We can see over here, it's still putting the job owner, the schedule owner, as being that server that's been marked inactive. And as soon as we reach the point where the server's been dead, we've done our 60-second wait after we've realized it's died, it's going to go ahead and switch the ownership of the jobs to Rundeck 1. And likewise, within my project, this project on the activity screen, it is actually going to restart the job, and it will restart it over here from this server. So provided that I have the retry settings. I think I showed you guys a different job. Sorry about that. Should have ran this job. And again, I'll just review those settings while we're waiting for things to bake. So it only retries the job when you have retry settings, right? So if I hadn't set this job is not going to get picked up by another server. So if I want to restart the job on the step it failed on, I'm going to go ahead and click these. If I only want to retry the nodes, right, where the job failed, so that depending on the workflow strategy, right, it will just pick up the nodes where it failed. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so go back over to my activity log. And I'm thinking that in this job, I started the wrong job. Does have retry. Okay. And it should show. I did have a problem where Rendeck did not show up as completely dead yesterday because of the way I killed it. Okay, so it is dead now. We can see that the schedules have switched over. And if I didn't muck my settings up, Okay. And we can see that it's still marking, it hasn't marked this one as incomplete yet, but you can see that it has started the retry on this server. So that other job will get marked incomplete, you know, after our times goes by. And typically you're not sitting here watching, right, as when a node goes down and seeing this stuff happen at the same time. Okay. Do you have any other questions, Nathan?
We do have a couple of questions. Maybe we can see if we can answer some of those quick, and if not, we'll follow up separately. So the oldest one was related to variables, and you might know the answer to this one. Are variables generated in the failed job inherited on the retry? As per the job is retry a variable from Rendeck itself used currently, not to repeat steps on retry. The latter part I didn't understand, but do you know if there are variables in the job that failed, would they get picked up in the retry?
Yes, so it's just like the run again button for, right, where it's going to take whatever options, I'm assuming you mean options, right, that were set at the time. Oh, I see what you're saying, like if you retry on a step and you have a variable, like a data variable, is that the question?
I think that is the question, yes. If there was something that would get inherited from one step to another, would that continue to get?
Yeah, so it should, because of, so when each step is running, Rendeck is setting up the environment variables, like, so all of the variables, the options, the jobs, the node options, and everything that is getting used by the step are actually environment variables. So it would have those settings to reset up the step.
Can we resume with non-sequential workflow strategy? So it all seems straightforward if you've got a sequential job, but if you're using workflow strategy and something that's non-sequential, should it pick up as expected? I would think it would.
No, so the retry on step actually requires a sequential, right? So you can't retry from a given step in any of the other workflow strategies at this time.
That's a good question, and thank you for that. Someone was wondering if you could show the logs, I guess, to see what things look like within the logs of the server. I'm not sure how easy that is to do at this point.
Yeah, and actually I meant to do that. So you can, this is actually my Rendeck server 1 logs. So it gets logged to the service log, right? When it's detecting that the other nodes are down, you'll see an entry. And as it's trying to, you can see the failed attempts here in the log as well. So all of this is logged. Yes.
If you don't, and I'm not sure if I understand this question, if you don't mention retry delay, after how much time will it retry? So if you haven't set a delay time, is there a default, maybe is the question?
Well, it's going to be cumulative of all those settings, right? So the heartbeat setting, like it has to recognize that the node is dead, and then the one that takes over the job, that those settings, right, there's a sleep on that. So it's going to be, and I tried to really minimize it for this demo because I felt like we were waiting a long time, right? But typically it's going to probably be up around 8 minutes or so before the job actually gets resumed if you're going by the default settings. So you don't want to take things over and shuffle them around too quickly, but it's all based on those settings that you're putting in the framework.properties file.
All right, I'm gonna take one last question here. I think we've essentially answered the others. With cluster mode on, do we need separate databases for 2 Rundeck instances? And the general answer is no. That's part of the purpose in a cluster, and part of what makes it a cluster is that all of the instances, however many there are, 2 or more, are all talking to the same database, so that they're getting they're updating the information that the other servers have in real time and getting that information back in real time. So that's that.